In the shadowy depths of Richmond Palace on a chilling March morning in 1603, courtiers stumbled upon a discovery that would send shivers down their spines. Amid the personal effects of England's most powerful monarch lay a letter, a document with contents so unsettling that it was immediately sealed away from public gaze. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who had reigned over England for 45 years, had died under circumstances far more sinister than history books dare portray. The revelations found in that letter hinted at a death not marked by a peaceful passing, but rather by decades of calculated poisoning potentially at her own hand. The woman who triumphed over the Spanish Armada, who transformed England into a maritime powerhouse, and who lent her name to an entire era had spent her final years imprisoned by her own vanity. The very makeup she used to uphold her legendary beauty may well have been the instrument of her demise. Yet the truth behind Elizabeth's death extends beyond mere cosmetic poisoning. It delves into the darkest depths of Tudor politics, where survival demanded deception and even queens were vulnerable to those who claimed to serve them. This is not the familiar tale of Gloriana that you encountered in school. It is the account of a woman ensnared between the impossible pressures of power and femininity, a desperate struggle to preserve her image that may have cost her everything. The evidence suggests Elizabeth I did not simply die. She was methodically murdered, perhaps by her own choices, in one of history's most tragic and protracted endings. Elizabeth Tudor's path to the throne was stained with blood from the moment of her conception. Born to Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth entered a world where many deemed her existence illegitimate. Her father's frantic quest for a male heir had already torn England from the Catholic Church, plunging the nation into religious upheaval. When Elizabeth was just 2 years old, she witnessed events that would haunt her for a lifetime: the systematic destruction of her mother. Anne Boleyn's execution in 1536 was anything but swift. Determined to justify his actions, Henry VIII orchestrated a campaign of character assassination, portraying Anne as an adulteress, a witch, and a traitor. The young Elizabeth watched as her mother was stripped of her title, her marriage rendered invalid, and her very existence erased from official records. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was led to the scaffold at the Tower of London, where a French swordsman, specially brought in for the occasion, severed her head with a single stroke. Suddenly declared illegitimate, Elizabeth was left motherless and titleless, completely at the mercy of a father who had proven he would kill those he professed to love. The psychological scars of this trauma are profound. Elizabeth grew up knowing that her birth had catalyzed her mother's death, and that her own survival rested entirely on her ability to please a man capable of ordering executions. The Tudor court was a place where children learned that love was fleeting, power was paramount, and even the closest relationships could turn deadly without warning. Henry's subsequent marriages and divorces reinforced these disturbing lessons. Elizabeth bore witness to her father's union with Jane Seymour, who died giving birth to the long-awaited male heir, Edward. She observed Henry's swift annulment of his marriage to Anne of Cleves and the horrific execution of Catherine Howard, her fifth stepmother, who was dragged to the block, screaming, for alleged adultery. Each marriage, each divorce, each execution taught Elizabeth that survival in the Tudor world required vigilance and absolute control. The young princess learned to navigate this perilous environment by honing her skills in deception. She excelled in her studies, mastering Latin, Greek, French, and Italian, realizing that her intelligence was her most reliable weapon. She cultivated an image of Protestant piety while privately questioning all religious authority. Most significantly, she learned to read the subtle signs of court politics, understanding that her life could depend on the interpretation of a glance, a gesture, or a carefully chosen word. By the time Henry VIII died in 1547, Elizabeth had already cultivated the skills necessary to excel as a queen. She possessed the ability to present multiple facades to diverse audiences, the talent for conveying much while saying little, and the awareness that power demanded the constant threat of violence. She understood that wielding authority as a woman meant facing perpetual suspicion, and that her survival required sacrificing personal desires for political necessity. The traumas of her childhood forged a foundation for everything that would follow. Elizabeth's later obsession with her appearance, her refusal to marry, her paranoid vigilance regarding loyalty, and ultimately her tragic final years all stemmed from the lessons learned in those early blood-soaked years when she discovered that royal parents could also become executioners. In October 1562, at the age of 29, Queen Elizabeth I faced what would prove to be the defining crisis of her reign and the onset of her gradual descent into vanity, one that would eventually lead to her demise. Smallpox, a disease that had already taken countless lives across Europe, struck the young queen with crippling force. For days, she lay near death in Hampton Court Palace, her body racked by fever, her counselors whispering about succession in the corridors outside her chamber. When she finally emerged from the brink, Elizabeth would discover she had lost more than just her health. She had lost the one thing she valued above all, her legendary beauty. The smallpox had ravaged her face, leaving deep pockmarks across her skin, particularly on her forehead and cheeks. In an era when a monarch's appearance was believed to reflect divine favor, this disfigurement was not merely cosmetic. It was a political catastrophe. Elizabeth's beauty had been one of her most powerful diplomatic weapons, used to manipulate foreign ambassadors and maintain the illusion that she might marry to forge alliances. European courts had described her as possessing skin white as snow and a complexion that seemed to glow with inner light. But that woman had disappeared forever. The psychological toll of this transformation cannot be overstated. Elizabeth had grown up understanding that her power was precarious, dependent on striking a delicate balance between being desirable enough to attract suitors while remaining independent enough to evade marriage. Her beauty had been her armor, her weapon, and her shield. Without it, she felt vulnerable in ways that transcended the merely physical. Contemporary observers noted that following her recovery, the Queen became increasingly obsessed with mirrors, spending hours each day scrutinizing her reflection and experimenting with various cosmetic treatments. It was during this period that Elizabeth first encountered lead-based cosmetics that would ultimately lead to her demise. Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, promised to produce the pale, smooth complexion that was the height of fashion among European nobility. The substance was expensive, exclusive, and devastatingly effective at masking imperfections. When applied thickly enough, it could completely cover the scars that smallpox had inflicted, resulting in an artificial smoothness reminiscent of her former beauty. Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting later described the elaborate ritual surrounding the Queen's daily makeup application. Each morning, she would sit for hours as layers of ceruse were meticulously applied to her face, neck, and hands. This laborious process required multiple coats to achieve the desired opacity. After the base layer, additional cosmetics were added: kohl around the eyes, rouge made from mercury sulfide on the lips and cheeks, and delicate painted details to accentuate her features. The immediate effect was breathtaking. Foreign ambassadors once again extolled Elizabeth's charms, praising her alabaster skin and ethereal beauty. Marriage negotiations reignited with renewed fervor. As European princes vied for the hand of the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth seemed to have successfully harnessed chemistry to restore her political power, but in doing so, she initiated a process that would gradually poison her body over the next 4 decades. The tragedy of Elizabeth's post-smallpox transformation lies in its success. The lead-based cosmetics not only concealed her scars, but also constructed an image of otherworldly perfection that became integral to her royal identity. She could neither abandon the makeup without exposing the damaged skin beneath, nor continue its use without continuously poisoning herself with toxic metals. In choosing beauty over health, political power over physical well-being, she set herself on a path toward a slow, agonizing demise. What began as a pursuit to cover smallpox scars gradually morphed into a daily ritual of self-poisoning that would last 40 years. Elizabeth's makeup routine, described by courtiers as lasting up to 4 hours each morning, involved the systematic application of substances that modern science identifies as among the most perilous chemicals known to humanity. The Venetian ceruse that formed her cosmetic foundation contained lead concentrations capable of horrifying contemporary toxicologists. while the additional products layered atop it introduced mercury, arsenic, and other lethal compounds into her system. The lead in Cyrus was particularly insidious, as it absorbed directly through the skin and accumulated in bodily tissues over time. Unlike acute poisoning, which manifests immediate symptoms, chronic lead exposure results in a gradual degradation of mental and physical function, a decline that can take decades to reveal itself. Elizabeth's daily application of thick layers of lead-based makeup meant she was receiving doses of this toxic metal far exceeding what would be deemed safe, even for industrial workers today. Eyewitness accounts described the Queen's makeup as so thick it resembled a mask rather than standard cosmetics. Visitors to the court observed that Elizabeth's face appeared to be carved from marble, with an unnatural smoothness glowing in candlelight. This mask-like appearance became so synonymous with Elizabeth that few subjects had ever beheld her unadorned face. The psychological reliance that developed around this cosmetic regimen was as perilous as the physical toll it exacted. Elizabeth grew convinced that her power and legitimacy hinged on preserving this artificial facade. She forbade the creation of realistic portraits in her later years, insisting that all depictions reflect the smooth, ageless visage sculpted by her makeup. The iconic portraits that proliferated during the final decades of her reign were not merely artistic expressions, but deliberate propaganda aimed at concealing the harsh reality of her deteriorating condition. As Elizabeth aged, the application process for her makeup became increasingly elaborate. Her ladies-in-waiting reported that she required ever thicker layers of Cyrus to achieve the desired effect as her natural skin became more damaged and discolored. What had initially involved a few layers of makeup transformed into a construction project, as cosmetics were applied so heavily that they cracked and flaked throughout the day, necessitating constant touch-ups and repairs. The economic cost of this cosmetic routine was staggering. Elizabeth spent the equivalent of millions of dollars in modern currency on her makeup supplies, importing the finest Cyrus from Venice and exotic pigments from around the world. The Queen's cosmetic expenses claimed a significant portion of the royal budget, reflecting both her dedication to her appearance and the increasing quantities of makeup necessary to maintain the illusion of youth and beauty. Most tragically, it seemed Elizabeth was aware of the perilous nature of her cosmetic routine but felt powerless to abandon it. Several of her closest advisors, including Sir William Cecil and Lord Burleigh, urged her to reduce her makeup usage, especially as rumors circulated regarding other noble women succumbing to cosmetic poisoning. Elizabeth's response was invariably the same. She could not present herself to her subjects or foreign dignitaries without her face, as she referred to her makeup. This artificial appearance had become so intrinsic to her identity as queen that removing it felt akin to abdicating the throne itself. As Elizabeth's reliance on lead-based cosmetics deepened, the royal court morphed into a peculiar theater of deception where reality and performance grew increasingly difficult to untangle. The Queen's growing paranoia about her appearance led to the installation of specially designed mirrors throughout her palace's surfaces, crafted to be subtly curved or tinted to yield a more flattering reflection. Commissioned from Venetian artisans at great cost, these mirrors created an environment where Elizabeth could sustain the illusion of successful transformation, even as her natural visage crumbled beneath the poisonous facade. By the 1580s, the psychological ramifications of chronic lead poisoning began to surface in Elizabeth's behavior, although courtiers attributed her increasingly erratic actions to the stresses of governance. Lead poisoning typically engenders symptoms such as irritability, memory loss, concentration difficulties, and episodes of confusion, all of which became more pronounced in the aging queen. Her notorious temper, once a calculated display of royal authority, devolved into unpredictable bursts of rage that unnerved even her most loyal advisors. The daily ritual of applying her makeup evolved into a form of torment from which Elizabeth seemed unable to escape. Her ladies-in-waiting described the process as both physically painful and emotionally harrowing. The lead-based Cyrus burned her skin, causing redness and irritation that required even more makeup for concealment. The weight of the cosmetics, applied so thickly they resembled plaster, triggered headaches and impeded facial expressions. Elizabeth's once enchanting smile, famed for its radiance, transformed into a rigid grimace maintained purely by willpower. As Elizabeth's attempts to sustain her youthful appearance continued, she became increasingly trapped in a web of deception that would ultimately lead to her downfall. The very beauty she had fought to preserve became the source of her demise. As the consequences of her vanity echoed through history, a tragic reminder of the costs of power and the lengths to which one would go to uphold an image. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to support our work. Never miss an upload. Like this vid, drop a comment and share it with others to help us grow this historical community.